Hey everyone, today we have a special guest on the show. It's David, a super interesting designer. How do I know he's interesting? He already told me his story, but I forgot to hit the record button. So now we're going to do the same discussion again so that you can hear it. He's got a really interesting story about how he started, gain skills, and move up in his career. And so I'll let you hear it from him. Hey David, what's up? How are you?
Hey,
Thank you for doing this second time with me.
yeah, of course. Thanks for having me again.
Okay, so you're a designer based in San Francisco.
Yes,
I'd love to hear how you got started, in design from education to your first job. Like, what was that like?
sure. Yeah, so I started out, it was about 2009, and I was in grad school for design
Okay,
and studying like print, poster design, things like that. And there was a startup that needed part time help.
okay.
And it was like the perfect job for senior year of school, you
So
know?
wait, can you elaborate how come like somebody learning print design would get into a job in a tech startup? Or it's just like because you're in San Francisco, everybody works in tech startups.
Yeah, it was kind of like I was actually kind of hesitant for a minute. Like I think literally that same week I had told my friend like, "Yeah, I think I just want to design books and not that website stuff."
Okay.
And then like a couple days later he said, "Hey, I know someone that really needs a designer. Would you mind doing that website stuff?" And I was like, And he's like, "It pays money." And I was, okay, that sounds good.
By the way, did you have kind of a portfolio back in the time, a website on your own? How do you like interview for that job?
No, not at all. I think I went in with the current work I was doing for a class,
Okay, so with class
just
schoolwork, yeah.
like like literally printouts of like everything I had done for like the
So
past semester, and was like,
no web experience, nothing like that.
no, I mean I had like done like GeoCities and stuff in the 90s, and
Yeah,
like
that
kind
doesn't
of some
count.
random things like that, but no, not like for a job.
Okay, so what did you do in that first job?
I was working kind of in a general design role.
Okay,
And at the time, I guess it was kind of like web design, you might call it, or like even at the time, webmaster.
okay.
And kind of doing everything from banner ads to website design, even ads for the local newspaper.
Oh wow, so really just
And
like everything, but around more of the
yeah,
marketing, not product design type of stuff. More like
it was
marketing
kind of
design, right?
across everything. And the
Okay.
company was, they were only about 10 people.
Mhm.
So everyone kind of did everything.
Okay.
So some days, like the marketing person was like, we need ads. And then the next day, like an engineer might be like, oh, we need more assets for the website. And so it was always kind of like a good variety.
Okay.
And I think that got me really interested, especially so much of the stuff was things that I didn't really even know what it was sometimes.
Okay, so now something really incredible happened during the first week doing banner
Yes.
ads, which is banners. Like I used to do banners 10 years ago as well, and I used to really hate it because you have to do all those
Oh,
different
I
sizes
totally
and
hated
everything.
it.
And so what happened with your first banner job?
So someone asked me on the team if I could make banner ads. I was like, yeah, yes, absolutely. And then I was like, Google, what is banner ads? And then I was like, okay, what sizes do you need? And they're like, all the standard ones. And I'm like, what sizes are banner ads? You know,
Google is your
and
best friend.
it was so good. I mean, even at the time, there wasn't quite as much like Medium articles and things like that to rely on, but it was still pretty good. And so I designed the banner ads. And I remember they came back to me and they were like, oh, yeah, we had the ads. Yeah, we wanted to talk to you about that. They converted about 20%. And I thought, like, I'm totally going to get fired. This is like my first week of a job. They knew I didn't know what I was doing. Like 20% is horrible. And I didn't really get conversion at the time. They're
Yeah.
like, no, no, no. Like we were doing like maybe like 5 or 6% conversion. This is amazing. Here's a raise. And so like my first week, they raised me from like $15 an hour, I think, to 20, which like at the time I was like, this
Incredible.
is amazing.
Yes.
I'm
Imagine
I'm
what's going
like
to happen on week
never
two.
gonna do better. Yeah. So it was really cool, and I got a sense like I didn't really get it yet, but I got a sense of like, oh, you can measure your work.
Yeah.
and like, metrics are actually a good thing. So especially in like graphic design school, that wasn't really part of that world.
Yeah. So how was the transition from really designing things like look like posters and print work into working for the web? And you were mentioning like 10 years ago, what was your tool? Like how did you work designing for, web or banners and stuff like that?
Yeah, it was uncomfortable at first, but everything was kind of still so new for me that it was just kind of more fun.
Yeah,
And also
there's
the
like
team
this
was so
huge,
small.
huge learning curve at the beginning of every new job, right?
Yeah, it was kind of also for everybody because it was such a new startup and it was 2009. Like the engineers were like, well, they actually probably knew everything already, but a lot of the team were like, we need to do like this thing today. How do we do it? So it was a lot of like on the spot learning.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so I think for me it was really difficult, but I was mostly doing like stuff I knew in design school, like InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator. And I kind of ditched Photoshop for Illustrator because it was a little
Okay.
closer to website, like actually like CSS and stuff.
Were you involved back at the time in like the development, like how they were transitioning your websites from your Illustrator to websites? Were you involved in that?
Not at first, and not generally a ton, but it really hit me very fast
Hmm.
that that existed. Like that
Yeah.
was still new for me and how to work with it. And so that was a big learning curve. Like, how do I work with engineers? Um, Things like at the time you couldn't make rounded corners unless you made an image sprite of rounded corners, and
Oh
the
man,
engineers
I
hated me
hate,
for
of
that.
course, of course.
And I was like, oh, why do you hate it? This is great design. And they were like, well, let me show you. Let me show you how it works. And then after that I was like, oh, we can do square corners. Like that can look just as good.
Yeah, yeah, it's just not worth the effort.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you were starting doing that. Now, what was your next step for you? At some point, did the learning curve kind of like normalize that you decided, I want to think about what's next?
Yeah, a little bit. Like I noticed a lot of other people at the company, like the CEO and engineers, were worrying about like flows and how things were built, and more of kind of like UX and like almost like system architect things. And that just got like really interesting to me because I was also doing a lot of production work for them and like cranking out ads, cranking out icons, things like that. And I was like, okay, I can do these things, and like the craft makes sense, but all this other stuff is like really interesting and
Yeah,
is
the
like
more
a huge
strategic stuff
challenge.
where you have to use your head and not just like do
Yeah.
the execution work. So what
Yeah.
was
And I
your
think,
Yeah, I was gonna ask
sorry.
what was your process to. I actually, by the way, I did the same kind of switch. I started in
Mhm.
advertising and production and moved kind of, I would say, up the value chain. But it's interesting for me to
Yeah.
hear how you learned it. Like, what was your method to? Because it's not obvious if that
Mhm.
you move from production to kind of more like UX and higher level thinking. It's totally different way of thinking. So how did you make that transition?
I think at the time there was a little bit of wiggle room because things were somewhat still kind of like Wild West. Like a lot of companies were still figuring things out at the time.
Mhm.
So I had a little bit of luck with that. But so after Town Hog was acquired, and
Wait,
so
Town
every,
Hog was the first company that you
that, yeah,
worked with?
sorry, that was the
Yeah,
first company I was
yeah.
working for, and they were
And
acquired. So
oh, while you were
everyone,
working there.
yeah,
Ah,
and
that's
so everyone
amazing.
then,
What
it was
what
great. Yeah.
what's an incredible experience.
Yeah,
Did
I at the time I didn't really get it. I think I was actually kind of bummed out because I was like, well, where do I work now?
okay.
And so
Did you
I
get to
did like,
get anything like equity type of
I
thing, really?
was not really. I was
Okay.
mostly doing like part time work for them, so I didn't
Okay.
really dig into all of that at the time. But I mean, it benefited me in so many ways
Amazing, of
besides
course.
that. And so after that, I did some freelancing and like contract work. I worked with a pretty awesome brand strategy firm for a little bit here, and I learned a ton about strategy, even though like still it was separate worlds, like strategy, design, no idea how they like kind of meet. But I got interested in
Did
that.
you get involved in the strategy and kind of started learning
Um,
then, or you
the,
were
the
just still just doing the
a,
production?
a little bit. So with them, it was on-site work. So we would fly somewhere and go like work at the company for a week or two. and it would be like really long days and working in the hotels. So I saw all the
But
stuff the strategists were doing.
what were you designing back at the
I
time?
was designing, so we were taking like a lot of decks
Yeah, that
to
work.
like
Yeah,
visualize the strategy. So kind of like figuring out like, oh, like why are you doing this? Why do you guys think this is good for the company? And then how do I make it something that you can look at and make sense?
yeah.
And so
A
that
lot of
was also exciting.
storytelling, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Yeah.
I think I knew at the time I didn't necessarily want to do like PowerPoint slide design for a very long time, but the strategic part was really cool.
Yeah.
And again, like the people were awesome.
By the
So I
way, I
was like,
had the same. Sorry for interrupting you.
oh
My
no, go
audience
ahead.
hates me for interrupting, but it's amazing because I have the same story when I was working in the advertising agency and I was doing production work. I was helping kind of the strategy department design all those. I just had to make the PowerPoints beautiful, which everybody hated it because what
Mhm.
designer enjoyed working with PowerPoint? But I was really intrigued with how they build the stories and how they are selling the strategy. And I actually learned how to sell strategy and discuss strategy that way. And
Mhm.
and doing the work that everybody hated doing was eventually turned to be kind of a benefit because I knew how to do things other people couldn't do.
Yeah.
So I think that's really insightful.
Yeah, it helps. And I think always having the attitude of just doing what needs to be done
Yeah,
is
of
really
course.
useful. Like, even if you don't, I mean, you don't have to enjoy it. You may, but just kind of like pitching in and doing what needs to be done, it usually ends up teaching you a lot.
Yeah. Okay, so what was your next step? You were trying to transition to a more strategic UX level work.
I did, and
How did you
I did,
learn?
and
How did you?
I wasn't really sure what UX was, but like at the time it was starting to be kind of like a term people were using more often. I know it's been around for a long time, but for me, like
Yeah.
my worldview was like still kind of like this, with the big world of design. And so I was working at Apple, after the strategy firm. And when I was there, I remember telling my coworker, I really want to do this user experience design because, I mean,
So can you say a word about what you did at Apple? Because you're just like,
yeah,
hey, I worked at Apple, and people might be like, oh my God, he worked at Apple. So just
yeah.
like
So
explain what was your part? What did you do there?
I was working on, the localization team, so
Okay.
translating like things into like every other language. I think at the time there was maybe 45 languages that Apple
Okay.
would use around the world,
And
and
does
so
that include what does that include? Like what formats or
it
things were you
it was
translating?
everything, literally everything that Apple shipped as a product. So packaging, brochures, interfaces, um,
Okay, so both
some
kind of
advertisements.
digital and print work.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
But
both.
still
Not
on
so
a
much on the
production
marketing
level.
side. Yeah, it was largely production.
Okay.
There was a little bit like we were looking at doing a lot more work inside of iOS and just kind
Hmm.
of seeing like how all of the people were designing for that was kind of amazing. And I was like, yeah, I want to do this. Like,
Okay.
this is really cool. And I told my coworker, like, yeah, I want to do this. And he was like, yeah, me too. And like, how do we do it? And we just started getting books. I actually worked with him again later at another job, which has actually been like a recurring thing for me.
So you kind of you helped each other. You were on the same
Yeah,
path, and you were doing this kind of together.
yeah, and also
That's
like
really
a lot
interesting.
of my other friends that are in design, we kind of had a similar curve. Like we're all kind of looking at stuff together and like, what are you reading? What are you looking at? Like, what are you doing, and why? Um, Having that kind of a support network is super important.
For sure, for sure. And like, can you share like when did you have time to read? Because everybody's like, I have to work. Like, when do you read books? So when were you reading?
um, then and now, like if I'm not sleeping or working, I'm reading.
Okay.
Back in when I was at Apple, like the time on the shuttle, it'd be like an hour or so back and forth. So that was like
Yeah,
really great time to read at lunch. Um, I've just always really enjoyed reading. So for me, it's not mostly a chore.
of course. Yeah.
Sometimes like really super technical books, it can get a little dense, but
Can you give some example to good books that you read to get into UX design
Oh
and
my
stuff like
gosh,
that?
yeah, I think
Yeah,
there
just
were
name a few.
there was I think Agile UX design,
Okay.
UX design for beginners. I think I can't remember the exact title. Um,
Okay.
when I got my first job as a UX designer, which was right after Apple, it was at a company doing API management software, so like super hardcore developer tools. The first
Okay.
week there, I bought the entire Rosenfeld catalog of books, which is all
Okay.
like UX design related stuff and like user testing and um, like Steve
Amazing.
Porter.
So you actually invested your whole salary into buying education to like prepare you for the actual job itself.
I think it might have been like $300 at the time, so it wasn't like that was a lot of money, sure, but yeah, it was definitely
Okay.
worth it. And at the time, I was trying to make sure like I want to be ahead of all of this stuff and really do a great job. So I just bought all these books and I didn't read them all cover to cover, but kind of like would flip through and be like, okay, what do I need to do this week, and which book tells me how to do that?
Great. And so you got actually the job in a as a UX designer.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
cool. So what was that like?
the job itself.
Yeah, like what were you doing? Like was that
It was it was kind of amazing at the time. I definitely wasn't technically ready for it, but I had a
okay?
super supportive boss who was still an amazing person. Like I still am in touch with her, and she had seen my work and took a chance. And she's like, "Look, I know you haven't done a lot of this, but I know you can do it, and I got your back."
So it seems like you're a big believer or a practitioner of the kind of fake it till you make it or something like that. You're like, I'm gonna be a UX designer. I'll
Yeah,
learn it on the job and like,
yes, and I definitely, I mean, that was definitely a risky way to go, but I also was super upfront all of the time. Like, this is what I do know, and this is what I don't know, but I can learn really, really fast. And luckily, from
yeah.
my previous jobs, I was like, oh, I had done this and this and this, and I didn't know anything when I started there, but I learned a lot. And so I think for me, the confidence was I can learn really fast.
And I thought, amazing. And I saw that you're now also involved in design sprints. Like
Yeah,
I saw that you took aj&smart's course about design sprints.
I
I really
did.
love those guys. So
They're
how did you manage to get involved with design sprints?
they are amazing. I love their team and their company, and the class is super good. Um, I was working a few years ago at a health tech startup here that was a Google Ventures partner, and
Okay.
that's actually part of why I joined their team was that they were working with Google Ventures, and I had seen a couple blog posts that Jake had done like on design
Mhm.
sprints. I was like, this is
What was the
amazing.
name of the company?
One Medical.
One medical. Never heard. Okay, that's cool.
They're here. They're like throughout the U.S., not international yet, but kind of
Okay.
like reimagining general practice. And they had done a lot of really great stuff. And for them, they were working on. I was working on the EMR software, so like the software doctors use
Yeah,
all
super
day for
complicated
everything. Yeah,
stuff.
it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Um, and so with design sprints, they were working with Google Ventures as a partner. So I kind of just absorbed everything I possibly could while I was there, and I had
And you've actually practiced design sprints with them?
yeah, I did a bunch of design sprints there, and that was like
What was the experience like?
it was really good. I think because the company was product was a smaller component, even though it's very like highly featured with what they do. They still have doctors and nurses and phlebotomists and operations teams and like all these different things that like a brick and mortar company has. And so product was like really kind of like the newest technology and stuff, but still serving the company itself. And so it was interesting in that you had like doctors and people like that that were the coworkers and a lot of people who weren't familiar with design processes. And what was great about doing the sprints was it got a lot of people together. One, they could understand what design does and what I did. But I think for me, the most important thing was I understand what they did and what they needed, and to kind of get all of their perspective. And it took a lot of things that like could have taken, or actually, had even at other companies, like 6 months, a year. Sometimes you work on these things, and then even then, still, it doesn't really kind of catch on, or it just isn't quite right. And we were able to like have a really big win in a week
Yeah,
with a group of
that's
people who were
crazy.
kind of a little skeptical, like, yeah, I haven't worked with these other teams before. Like they were totally willing to try it, but they were not certain on the results. And then having the
Yeah.
results be like everyone's best case scenario a lot of the time was really helpful.
Yeah, I love design sprints. I think I actually feel like this is kind of like almost the highest level that you can engage as a kind of a UX designer in thinking about the whole product, the whole problem, like um, strategically.
Hmm.
So where you are right now in your career, kind of like where you are right now and what's your next step?
So where I am right now, I am moving into some new interesting things. Most recently, I was VP of design for another health tech startup here, working like
Nice.
helping patients and surgeons with surgery. So it was another interesting, super complex
So at
tool.
this point, you're already managing a team of designers,
This was another
or
small
you're still
startup,
very
so it
okay.
was maybe like 10 people total. So I
Okay,
was
so you were
doing,
still very much hands-on.
yes, I was like, it was about 50-50. So a lot of strategy, getting into even like business strategy, like
Amazing.
designing sales funnels, figuring out stuff, like working on a lot of pitch decks, but not as like the production person, but like what needs to go into the pitch deck, and like how do we convince VCs to get funding. And a lot of that was like
Yeah,
another big learning curve, but great. And kind of,
I love it. For me,
yeah,
that's like
it's so
one of the
it's so
most,
fun.
yeah.
And like operationalizing design too.
What does that mean?
So kind of like coming up with repeatable patterns to use within the company. So I'm one person and I can only do so much. But if you can kind of come up with ways that other people can just adopt a process, kind of like how design sprints
Hmm.
works, right? Where
Yeah.
like if you understand and can create processes and kind of fine tune
Hmm.
those, applying product and UX thinking to processes even inside the company, you can kind of help make things like be a little bit more well oiled.
Yeah, super, super interesting. So you're obviously like from the earlier parts of your career until now, you're like super always invested in, acquiring new skills, whether it's
Yeah.
UX, design sprints. Now you've been a part of my Webflows masterclass.
Yes.
Actually, what was the reason for you joining, like at this point for you?
Okay, so number one was I've gotten so much value from watching you, just like
Okay,
as like a
that's cool.
fellow designer. I was, and like, I this guy seems great. Like I actually enjoy watching your show, and thought it would just be
Thank
cool.
you.
Like a lot of times for me, I'm like, do I want to hang out with this person? Then I'm
Okay,
happy, right? And
okay, that's
so
great.
I that was really great. But I think for me, the switch for like why I decided to buy the class was because I'm starting out on some new ventures coming up. I wanted to be able to build it out.
Besides the
Oh,
company
so
that you're working with,
yeah, I'm
or within the company?
outside of the company. So
Okay,
there's some cool things going on with that I can't quite talk about yet, but
okay,
we're kind of moving on to other things individually at the moment.
okay.
So for me, what's next? Some things I'm still figuring out. But part of that, like currently facilitating design sprints for companies in the area, as well as helping teams hire either their first designer or design teams, which I've done a bunch of,
Yeah,
and it's super,
I'm
super,
also
super
doing.
necessary. It's really hard for companies to hire
True.
designers and really know what is good or
True.
bad or needed. So for me, with the web class, I was like, I'm going to be designing a lot of websites, and I'm really rusty with my code skills. This looks amazing.
Did you know how to code?
Yeah,
Did you
yeah, I
actually
did.
learn
I
to code?
put a lot of investment in early on in years in coding,
Hmm.
but as I got into like SaaS enterprise stuff, it was really not beneficial for me to be coding what I was working on. Um,
Yeah,
so I kind of stepped back. And actually, like when you think about, there's the like design, product management, engineering, like overlapping circles. I was heavy into the engineering design, and then I kind of moved over to the like product management design, which is more
yeah,
recent. And so my coding skills are really rusty. Like I understand, and like I'm always when I'm working directly with engineers, and super important to know what they can do and what you can and can't build. But I'm not doing it as hands
true.
on anymore. And so I
Mhm.
needed something where it wasn't going to take me like a month to build like a 2-page website and like lots of frustration. And
Yeah,
so what I thought before taking the class, I was like, this looks perfect. And then after the class, I was like, that was perfect plus things that like I'm discovering that I want to do that I didn't know, which has been really good. Like I think we had talked about like doing some animation stuff last week, um,
yeah,
and kind of like, okay, I got here now. I have no idea how to do this, and it's funny because I'm back with web design. I'm back in a place where I'm uncomfortable because it's not something I do every day anymore, and the class really helped me feel like somebody had my back, and like if I hit a problem, it's going to be okay. And for me, like those kind of things, if it's like in my like budget range, I'm like, take my money. Like solve my problem now. I don't want to spend like a month freaking out on my website when I could do it. I literally,
yeah.
so
It's true.
I'm transferring my domain host right now, and I will
Yeah.
have it up, I think, on Monday. But the building
Okay.
part, not the designing part, but the building part, I did in maybe a day and a half. And like literally, like I
Amazing.
finished it yesterday and was like, is this really
Okay.
done?
Please share
I
the.
will. I
Yeah, I want
will.
to see it. Yeah.
I'm
I mean,
going.
so hopefully by the time this video goes live, I don't know, maybe it will go live before. So,
Yeah.
but eventually I'll put the
Yeah,
link in
I'll
as well
send
so
you
everybody
the I'll
can
send
see
you
it.
the site link once it's up, and then
Yeah.
people can
Oh yeah.
marvel. it's
Yeah.
it's
Sure.
really an
Listen,
MVP at
David.
the
It's
moment,
really.
but like I'm learning so
I
much.
think that what you're describing. So, first of all, again, thank you for sharing your story, which I think is incredible because I think so many people, they reach out to me and they talk and they were asking about moving from kind of low level jobs, maybe production, maybe working with clients, or situation where their work is either undervalued
Yeah,
or it's just not valuable
yep,
enough because they're doing just like simple production work, and moving up the value ladder and being able to provide more value. I think is something that a lot of people are interested in, and I think your story and how you kind of invest and took the time to read and take classes and everything, I think it's a great way for people to show how it can be done. And second of all, it's a journey of like 10 years, like
yeah.
you've
It takes a
described.
long
So it's
time.
not like a magic pill, but it takes a constant investment. So thanks so much,
Yeah,
David.
thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. Good luck with your next step in your journey, and yeah, I'm excited to see where this is
Yeah,
heading.
thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
All right,
All
thank
right,
you.
I'll see you later.
Bye bye. Have an
You
awesome
too.
day.